What is this garbage you're watching?
I want to watch the news.
Are you making headway at least?
This is the news.
I want to return the boy before Megadeth on stage. What was David Ellefson like back then?
I grew up in a really good family. We had a big farm. We had to work on the farm all the time. We didn't have animals, but it was grain. It was a grain farm. So there was always a lot to do. On a farm, there's never really a day off. We would take Sunday off, go to church, right? But it was a good family upbringing. My love of rock and roll, if anything, probably for sure, gave me my own path and gave me a way off the farm, to Hollywood and then into Megadeth and everything else. But when I was growing up, I was out playing rock and roll all the time. I was always out, performing. I had my own bands and stuff. So I went from kind of maybe the Sunday school kid to being a rock and roll guy. So I think, having those Minnesota roots, it's kind of funny you would ask that because I think having those roots had definitely carried through everything that I did. I think it gave me a consistency. I was more level. I wasn't sort of up and down because I had a good family. I saw, I had good, sort of a proper etiquette of how to live my life, how to treat people, and how to behave, even inside of rock and roll, which seemed to be this community that you could do whatever you want. It turns out you really shouldn't, So I think all of that was good for me and still carries through to my life today.
It's been 14 years since Megadeth's second album, Peace Sells. Do you think that the record where the band found his sound?
Yeah, I mean, look, Peace Sells, I think, was the album that defined us. Killing Is My Business was, the first planting the flag, to say this is, here we are, our first band, our first name, everything else. But I think, Peace Sells defined us. We were no longer just sort of the former guy from Metallica. We had our own sound, and that really was developed through the four of us. It was Gar Samuelson, Chris Poland, me, Dave. That gave us a definition of a sound, because then even So Far So Good, So What, Jeff Young, his style of playing sort of accentuated and maybe even raised the bar a bit from where Chris was. Because then Chris got clean and he had a whole other, he really, I think, realized his greatest talents once he got clean after Megadeth and had returned to Metalopolis and Ohm and everything else. I think now you really hear all of who Chris Poland is. But we got a foreshadowing of that with his role in Megadeth on the Peace Sells album, especially. A little bit, of course, on Killing Is My Business, but Peace Sells, we came into our own as a group with that. And then, look, the two guitar styles, Dave's style, and then the other guitar player was always this really kind of fluid, melodic type of guitar player. And that really, created the, that juxtaposed the two styles of guitar work inside of Megadeth.
Peace Sells talking about the political and social issues. How does it feel to release that many of problems you were calling out in that song are still going?
I think most of Megadeth's song titles, our song topics, our lyrics were very timeless. Peace Sells, but who's buying? That wasn't new in 1986. That was almost, looking back in time, that's a true statement, right? So since the beginning of time, right? So moving from that place forward for another 40 years, it's like, yep, nothing's changed, And I think, we had a producer, Dan Huff, when we were doing Cryptic Writings and the Risk albums, he said, he goes, if you write about your life, you'll always win, because people are people and people will always relate to other people, right? Because in some way we have commonalities between all of us. So rather than trying to think too big or sort of be too smart for the room, just write about your life, because life stories will always they're timeless, right? Because people will continue to go through. Peace Sells, but who's buying? That's one of those life stories.
that you keep writing songs with that awareness, like 99 Ways to Die, which spoke about the use of the guns among the young people. At that time, tragedy were already happening in school. Do you feel the Megadeth have a need to speak about that?
You know, I don't think we thought too much about it. I think we just did what was organically, naturally heartfelt in front of us, and that's, I think there came a point maybe later in the 90s, certainly in the 2000s, where maybe there was this attempt to try to repeat past successes. And those, you can't try to rewrite Symphony of Destruction. You can't try to rewrite Sweating Bullets. Those things are what they are, and they happened in that moment organically. And, I think anytime an artist tries to go back in time, you're really cheating yourself of what's in front of you, because life is in front of you, not behind you. And as long as you're moving forward and you're open to what's coming in front of you, that's your best work. Your best work is always in front of you.
In the late of 80, when you are touring with Alice Cooper, is it true that he started helping you to quit drugs?
Yeah, I mean, and he didn't come to us. It was just in our conversation with him. He talked about how he drank a bottle of whiskey for 20 years, every day. And he said and he was 4 years clean, I think, at the time, and rebuilding his life and his career. And he just said, yeah, guys, just be careful, and yeah, to hear it from someone like Alice who had been there, it wasn't someone who didn't have the experience. It was someone who knew very well what this was about, knew very well how this was going to go. And, that's why, even to this day, I just did his rock and roll fantasy camp back in November, and I'm sitting there with him, and Rob Halford talked very openly about his own sobriety. When we did the Painkiller tour in 1990, I was, within my first year of sobriety that year. And I think Rob was 2 or 3, maybe 4 years clean himself. And, Rob doesn't talk. Actually, he is pretty open about it. At the fantasy camp, he talked very openly about it. And so here I was sitting between my heroes, Rob Halford and Alice Cooper, both guys who got clean. Their best years happened after that. And here I am, a guy who got clean, in and around both of them. And the best years of my life and my career happened as well. So I think that's all that really needs to be said about it. Is I've been lucky enough to be surrounded with some very good influences.
What was it that pushing you to go into rehab?
Well, I had a girlfriend who found my drugs, so that'll do it. The angry girlfriend. But it happened for a reason, and it happened when it did, how it did, and at that point, I had to deal with it. And that was in August of 1988, right around Castle Donington for Megadeth. We were getting ready to do some big Monsters of Rock shows in Europe. And the truth of it is I was deep into some pretty heavy drugs, and people who loved me and cared about me, they stood up and said something, and that's what turned the corner. And it was like, we gotta shut this down, and this band needs help. David needs help. We got it. These guys got to get clean and get it together. And it was really at a point in time where the music industry was no longer tolerating that kind of behavior. The music industry was saying no more. We're not. Our manager at the time was Doc McGee. And he said, we're not dragging incapacitated, drugged out rock stars around the world anymore. We're here to work hard, make a lot of money, be famous, and everybody wins, but everybody's got to be healthy. So get healthy, we'll help you. And if you don't want the help, there's the door, And so the rules were laid down pretty hard and pretty clear. That was at that moment in time. So that was late 80s heading into, and finally by 1990, I got clean and got it together. So, and look, everybody can do whatever they want. I'm not here to preach and do or anything, but that's just my story. That's all that is.
I want to take you now to December 1994 when you played for the first time here in Argentina. Did you feel something special, or at that moment was it just another city?
No, it was as you know, you know the answer to that. I mean, Argentina and Chile and Brazil. I mean, that was we kind of looked at it as South America. And now, but I think when we got to Argentina was when we really understood the cultures and the specific nature of these countries down there. And Argentina, there was just something special about Argentina, above and beyond anywhere else we had ever been in the world. You know, Japan has its own flavor. You could go to, you know, again, other parts of even South America, they've got their own flavor, but Argentina, you know, Aguante Megadeth, you know what I mean? That just right there. We get there to the airport, it's Beatlemania. We get to the hotel, it's Beatlemania. I mean, we couldn't even leave the hotel. Like we were trapped. You know, we stayed at the Sheraton. They were taking the rocks out front from this little display, and they were writing Megadeth on the lawn. And I think we came down there to play 2 shows, and the promoter came to us and says, "Can we add 2 more?" We said, "Sure." And then he said, "Can we add another one?" We said, "Sure." And then finally, we're like, "Look, we have to get back home. We got to get back home to America because we've got other tour dates ahead of us." But we ended up, you know, we came for 2 shows and we stayed for 5. And they just kept adding. And the promoter said, we could stay here another couple of weeks if you want to just play every night, you know. We were playing at the Obros, you know, arena there. Yeah. And, you know, and that impression has impacted not only Megadeth, but it's impacted me. I mean, I'm coming back there obviously in February, and it's just unbelievable how much that has impacted me. And I was just there with Kings of Thrash back in November or back in December rather. And, you know, the heartfelt passion of the people and everything about it is just, it's beyond parallel, man. It's just unbelievable how deep it is. And it's lasting. I tell people about it up here. You know, Argentina is the victory lap for, you know, for my career. It really is.
You play in Buenos Aires many times, but I want to take you to a very special moment in 2016 when did that acoustic set outside the hotel, song with the fan. Do you remember that?
Yeah. I mean, we literally couldn't move. I mean, we would go out to the van or whatever. Eventually, the van started coming inside the hotel, and we would take the secret entrance out because of just the fandom. And you know, we were told it was the Rolling Stones, U2, the Ramones, and Megadeth. We were the first 4 that really had this just overwhelming impact. That was just, we couldn't even believe it. I mean, it was just incredible how fantastic that was. So yeah, I mean, I'll never forget those days. I mean, it was you know, it was something that I got to experience in my lifetime that's left a lasting impact.
Just weeks ago, you were here in Buenos Aires with the King of Thrash, like you mentioned, and the next month you will back with the Pastor playing the city and the different provinces and the festival of Hard Rock. How do you prepare for that concert in Argentina?
The bass story is really more about me telling the story of my career through my bass. You know, we play some cover songs, some stuff I grew up with, some bands that I grew up with, as well as certainly, you know, paying a nod to, you know, to some of the Megadeth stuff as well. So they're all part of my story. And it's, you know, I didn't plan on having 4 bands that I'm in, but it just turned out that way between Bass Warrior, Bass Story, Kings of Thrash, and now Metal Church, you know, to have 4 bands that I'm a part of. But, you know, for some reason, it's okay. You know, it's okay to have it land like that. You know, it's creative, it's fun, and it's something that that works well for me.